you do. You chose to die instead of giving up your colleague. Not everybody does.
Nuclear holocaust.
Something what?
It'll open the right doors, wrong ones too.
Looking at the world in a new way.
TENET, Comprehensive Film Analysis and Explanation. This is a complete analysis and explanation of Christopher Nolan's 2020 film, TENET. The film operates as both a spy thriller and a hard science fiction puzzle box, built entirely around the concept of time inversion rather than traditional time travel. Unlike films where characters jump between fixed points in time, TENET proposes a world where entropy can be reversed, causing objects and people to move backward through time, as if a film reel were running in reverse. The title TENET itself is a palindrome, reading identically forward and backward, which directly mirrors the film's structural design. The first half of the narrative moves forward conventionally, while the second half reveals inverted perspectives and mirror scenes that recontextualize everything witnessed earlier. The word also forms the center of the ancient Seta Square, a Latin palindrome that provides the names of key characters and locations: Setu, Aripo, Tenet, Opera, and Rhodes. The film's protagonist is never given a name, referred to only as the protagonist, played by John David Washington. This is a deliberate choice by Nolan to make him an audience surrogate, a cipher without backstory or personal attachments. He begins as a CIA operative participating in a covert extraction at a Kiev opera house, a mission that goes catastrophically wrong when terrorists take the audience hostage. During the opera siege, the protagonist notices unusual ammunition, bullets that appear to fly backward into guns rather than firing forward. He is captured and tortured by Russian operatives but refuses to betray his team, swallowing a suicide pill that turns out to be a test. He wakes up on a windmill farm, recruited by a secret organization called TENET, armed with nothing but the word itself to open doors and access resources. The organization TENET exists to prevent World War III, specifically an attack more devastating than nuclear holocaust. The threat comes not from a nation, but from the future itself. A future generation, facing ecological collapse, global warming, and an uninhabitable planet, has decided to erase the past entirely using a doomsday device called the algorithm. The algorithm was invented by a future scientist who discovered a way to invert the entropy of the entire world simultaneously. Horrified by the potential for omnicide, she broke the algorithm into 9 pieces and hid them in the past, specifically within nuclear waste sites of the Soviet Union's closed cities, including Stalsk, 12. The future generation communicates with the past through dead drops, sending inverted gold bars and instructions. Andrei Sater, played by Kenneth Branagh, is the film's villain and the broker between the future and the present. He grew up in the ruins of Stalsk, 12, a ghost town contaminated by nuclear waste, where as a young man he discovered a time capsule containing gold and a letter from the future. His terminal pancreatic cancer makes him fearless, as he has nothing left to lose. Sater's motivation is complex. He is both an instrument of the future and a man seeking control over his own life. His abusive marriage to Kat, played by Elizabeth Debicki, mirrors his desire to dominate time itself. He monitors her every movement, uses a forged Goya painting to trap her in the relationship, and threatens her son's safety to ensure compliance. His dead man switch, a Fitbit-like heart rate monitor, is programmed to transmit the algorithm's activation coordinates the moment his heart stops. Kat is the emotional center of the film, though she also represents Nolan's recurring criticism regarding female character writing. Her primary motivation is her son, and she is initially presented as a damsel in distress whom the protagonist must rescue. However, she ultimately kills Sater herself, breaking the cycle of abuse and reclaiming her agency. Her knowledge of Sater's patterns and her ability to lie to his face become crucial tactical assets. Neil, played by Robert Pattinson, is the film's emotional heart and most tragic figure. He presents himself as a British operative with a casual demeanor and encyclopedic knowledge of inversion mechanics. Throughout the film, he saves the protagonist repeatedly, displaying an almost prescient understanding of where danger will emerge. The reveal that Neil was recruited by the protagonist in the future and has traveled backward through years of his own life to help his friend complete the mission recontextualizes every casual interaction. The red trinket on Neil's backpack serves as the audience's visual anchor. This simple cord allows viewers to identify Neil as the masked soldier who saves the protagonist at the Kiev Opera House, and crucially, as the unnamed soldier who takes the bullet for him inside the hypocenter tunnel at Stalsk 12. Neil knows he is walking to his death when he runs back toward the turnstile, and his final line, "For me, this is the end of a beautiful friendship," is devastating because for the protagonist, the friendship is only beginning. The mechanics of inversion in TENET operate on the principle of entropy reversal. In normal physics, entropy flows from order to disorder, which we experience as time moving forward. Inversion reverses an object's entropy, causing it to move backward through time while still interacting with the forward-moving world. A normal bullet fires from a gun into a wall. An inverted bullet unfires from the wall back into the gun, with the gun catching it rather than firing it. The turnstile is the machine that accomplishes inversion. It consists of 2 rotating chambers separated by glass. A person enters one side, passes through the rotating mechanism, and emerges on the other side with their entropy reversed. If a forward person enters a turnstile, an inverted person emerges on the opposite side. This creates the possibility of seeing oneself enter and exit simultaneously, which the film warns is catastrophic if the 2 versions touch. Annihilation is the term used for when an inverted person or object touches its forward counterpart. Because they are the same matter moving in opposite temporal directions, contact causes mutual destruction in a burst of energy. Neil warns the protagonist about this during the highway chase, when an inverted car nearly collides with its forward self. This rule also explains why inverted soldiers cannot simply fight their past selves without risking annihilation. The temporal pincer movement is the film's signature military tactic. A commander splits their forces into 2 teams, one moving forward through time, one moving inverted. The inverted team experiences the battle backward, gathering intelligence about enemy positions and outcomes. They then revert to forward motion and share this intelligence with the forward team before the battle begins. This creates a closed loop where knowledge flows from future to past, ensuring tactical perfection. The final battle at Stalsk 12 is a temporal pincer movement executed on a massive scale. The red team attacks the bunker from 10 o'clock to midnight moving forward. The blue team attacks from midnight back to 10 o'clock moving inverted. The blue team reports everything that happens to the red team before the red team starts. This is why Red Team members already know where mines are buried and where enemy fire will concentrate. They have received after-action reports from a battle that hasn't happened yet. The hypocenter is a buried bunker at Stalsk 12 where the final piece of the algorithm is hidden. Seta's plan is to detonate a nuclear device that will send the complete algorithm into the Earth, activating it and reversing entropy for the entire planet. The protagonist and Ives, the TENET commander, reach the algorithm simultaneously with Seta's men, only to find themselves trapped behind a locked gate with the bomb counting down. The locked gate scene contains the film's most important emotional beat. As the protagonist and Ives watch helplessly, a dead soldier on the other side of the gate suddenly springs to life backward, takes a bullet, unlocks the gate, and then dies again as forward time resumes. That soldier is Neil, identifiable by the red trinket on his backpack. Neil has inverted himself to return to the hypocenter after already experiencing the mission, knowing he will die to save his friend. The Vietnam timeline runs parallel to the Stalsk 12 battle, but occurs days earlier on Seta's yacht. Kat travels back to this specific moment because it represents the last time Seta was truly happy with his wife and son. She kills him precisely as the protagonist secures the algorithm, ensuring that Seta's death occurs after the algorithm is safe, so his dead man switch does not trigger the apocalypse. The film rejects multiverse theory entirely. Its mantra, repeated by multiple characters, is what's happened, happened. There is no alternate timeline where events unfold differently. When the protagonist travels to the past, he does not change history. He fulfills it. He was always there. The Opera House rescue always happened. The inverted bullet in the lab always appeared. This philosophical commitment to a block universe model of time is what distinguishes TENET from films like Back to the Future or Avengers: Endgame. The scientist who explains inversion to the protagonist early in the film gives him crucial advice. Don't try to understand it. Feel it. This is the film's thesis statement. Nolan is not asking audiences to parse every scientific detail. Much of the physics is deliberately incomprehensible. Instead, he asks viewers to accept the mechanics on an intuitive level, as the characters themselves must. The TENET organization operates on faith in the system rather than complete knowledge of it. Global warming and ecological collapse function as the film's hidden villain. The future generation is not evil in the traditional sense. They are desperate. Their planet is dying because of industrial activity in the past. Their logic, as Seta articulates it, is that the past destroyed the future's world, so the past has no right to exist. Seta asks the protagonist directly, "Are you sure you want to stop me?" implying that humanity might deserve annihilation for its ecological crimes. The Seta square is the film's hidden structural blueprint. The 5x5 Latin palindrome reads the same in every direction, just as TENET flows forward and backward simultaneously. Seta is the villain. Arepo is the forger who created Kat's fake Goya painting, mentioned but never seen on screen. TENET is the organization. Opera is the location of the opening siege. Rodas is the name of the security company operating the Oslo Freeport, where the first turnstile is housed. Every key element of the film is contained within this ancient puzzle. The Oslo Freeport sequence demonstrates inversion's practical applications. The protagonist fights a masked inverted assailant who moves backward, throwing punches that seem to reverse midair and kicking walls to move in unnatural directions. The choreography required actors to learn fight scenes in reverse, then perform them forward while the film was run backward. This practical approach, avoiding CGI where possible, gives the inverted action a tangible, physical weight that digital effects could not replicate. The highway chase sequence in Tallinn is the film's most complex set piece. The protagonist drives a car carrying the final piece of the algorithm, while an inverted Seta drives backward in a BMW. They communicate through a radio that has been inverted, causing Seta's voice to play in reverse unless the protagonist inverts his own playback device. The chase ends when an inverted car flips and then unflips as time reverses, a practical effect achieved by mounting a car on a rotating rig and filming in both directions. The forged Goya painting serves as Kat's prison and her key to freedom. Seta purchased a fake Goya, knowing it was forged by Arepo, and stores it in the Oslo Freeport. Kat, an art appraiser who authenticated the painting, is trapped because revealing the forgery would destroy her professional reputation. Seta uses this leverage to control her. The protagonist steals the painting to free Kat, but the heist requires him to invert himself, creating the paradox where he fights his own past self in the Freeport. The film's sound mixing was widely criticized upon release, with many reviewers noting that dialogue is often buried beneath Ludwig Göransson's pounding score. This was a deliberate artistic choice by Nolan, who wanted audiences to experience the characters' confusion and sensory overload. Important expository dialogue is sometimes intentionally inaudible, forcing viewers to piece together information from context and action. Whether this choice succeeds or fails remains debated, but it is undeniably intentional rather than a technical error. Ludwig Göransson's score drives the film relentlessly, incorporating inverted sounds and reverse samples. The main theme's rhythmic pulse mirrors a ticking clock, building tension across scenes. For the inverted sequences, Göransson recorded orchestral passages and then reversed the audio, creating music that sounds alien and unnatural when played forward. The score's most innovative element is the use of seismic bass tones that physicalize the film's pressure and momentum, felt as much as heard in IMAX theaters. The cinematography by Hoyt van Hoytema uses IMAX cameras extensively, with aspect ratios shifting between 1.90 to 1 for IMAX scenes and 2.20 to 1 for conventional sequences. This shifting frame reflects the film's temporal instability, with the image itself seeming to expand and contract. The inverted sequences employ subtle visual cues. Steam and smoke move toward its source rather than away, waves recede from shorelines, and shattered glass reassembles itself before breaking again. Practical effects dominate Tenet to an extraordinary degree. Nolan crashed a real Boeing 747 into a hangar rather than using CGI. The inverted car chase used cars driven in reverse by professional stunt drivers, with camera cars also moving backward. The turnstile sequences required building two identical sets side by side, with actors performing simultaneously on both sides as the camera rotated between them. This commitment to practical filmmaking gives the impossible imagery a documentary authenticity. The film's critical reception was sharply divided. Positive reviews praised its ambition, practical effects, and conceptual originality. Roger Ebert's site gave it 4 stars, calling it Nolan's most radical film. The negative reviews focused on emotional coldness, arguing that the mathematical complexity comes at the expense of character investment. The protagonist has no arc, Kat is underwritten, and the relationship between them lacks chemistry. Many critics concluded that Tenet is a film to be admired rather than loved. The Nolan problem refers to the director's tendency toward intellectual abstraction over emotional connection. Tenet represents the extreme end of this spectrum. Unlike Inception, which balanced dream mechanics with Cobb's grief over his wife, or Interstellar, which anchored its black holes and time dilation in a father-daughter relationship, Tenet offers no such emotional anchor until Neil's final sacrifice. For many viewers, this makes the film feel like a puzzle without a heart. The film's box office performance was complicated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Released in September 2020, Tenet grossed $363 million worldwide against a $200 million budget. A disappointing return for a Nolan film, but remarkable given that many theaters were closed. Warner Brothers used the film as a test case for theatrical exhibition during the pandemic, ultimately deciding that the experiment had failed and shifting many 2021 releases to streaming. The ending reveals that the protagonist is the founder of Tenet. He recruited Neil in the future, established the organization's protocols, and then inverted himself to return to the past and ensure his own recruitment. The entire film is a bootstrap paradox. The protagonist only joins Tenet because the protagonist created Tenet to recruit him. There is no origin point for the information or the organization. They exist as a closed loop, a temporal palindrome made manifest. The final scene shows the protagonist killing Priya, the Indian arms dealer who has been manipulating events from the shadows. He does this to save Kat and her son, ensuring that Priya cannot eliminate witnesses to the Tenet conspiracy. As he walks away, he watches Neil run back toward the turnstile, knowing Neil is going to his death. The protagonist cannot warn Neil without breaking the temporal logic that ensures the algorithm is secured. He must let his friend die. The film's final line belongs to Neil. "We live in a twilight world. There are no friends at dusk." This echoes the opening line spoken by the protagonist's handler, creating a circular structure that mirrors the film's temporal mechanics. The twilight world is the world of inverted time, where cause and effect are reversed, where friends are strangers, and where the end of a friendship for one person is its beginning for another. Tenet is not a film about time travel in the conventional sense. It is about time as a physical battleground, a resource to be weaponized, a dimension that can be invaded and fought within. The film's achievement is not in creating a coherent scientific model. Physicists have pointed out numerous flaws in the entropy inversion premise, but in creating a visceral, tactile experience of temporal warfare. The inverted fights, the backward explosions, the cars that uncrash themselves. These images are unprecedented in cinema. The film requires multiple viewings, but not primarily to understand the plot. The plot, once mapped, is relatively straightforward. The multiple viewings are required to feel the tragedy of Neil, to notice the red trinket on the backpack in the opera house, to recognize the inverted soldier who saves the protagonist before he even knows he needs saving. Tenet is a film that exists backward and forward simultaneously, and like Neil's relationship with the protagonist, its emotional impact is only fully accessible in retrospect. Nolan has stated in interviews that Tenet is the most ambitious film he has ever made, and that he expects audiences to see it multiple times. He has also acknowledged that some sequences are deliberately incomprehensible on first viewing, designed to reward repeat viewings rather than immediate clarity. This approach aligns with his stated goal of creating theatrical experiences that cannot be replicated on home viewing, though the irony is that Tenet may require pause and rewind functions more than any other film in his filmography. The film's legacy remains uncertain. Some critics have already declared it a misunderstood masterpiece, while others maintain that it is Nolan's first failure. What is undeniable is that Tenet pushed the boundaries of what blockbuster cinema can attempt. No other major studio film has ever attempted to visualize time inversion with such commitment and rigor. The film may be cold, but it is also singular, a puzzle box that continues to generate discussion and analysis years after its release. The relationship between the protagonist and Neil has been read by some viewers as romantic, though Nolan has neither confirmed nor denied this interpretation. Robert Pattinson has described the relationship as beyond friendship, beyond love. A bond formed across years of temporal travel. Whether romantic or platonic, the tragedy is the same. Neil gives his life for a man who has not yet become his friend, and the protagonist must carry the memory of a friendship that for Neil has already ended. Kat's final scene shows her watching her son play, free from Sada's control. She has killed her abuser, secured her child's future, and ensured that the algorithm will not activate. Her arc, though underwritten compared to the male characters, concludes with genuine agency. She is not rescued by the protagonist at the end. She rescues herself and her son, with the protagonist merely removing the final threat Priya represents. The film's treatment of its female characters has been criticized extensively. Kat exists primarily as motivation for the male characters and as a hostage to be rescued. The only other significant female character is the scientist who explains inversion to the protagonist in the opening scenes, and she disappears from the narrative entirely after her expository function is complete. This is a consistent criticism of Nolan's filmography, from Memento to Oppenheimer, and Tenet does nothing to address it. The film's production budget was $200 million, making it one of the most expensive original films ever made. Unlike Marvel films or sequels, Tenet had no built-in audience and no intellectual property recognition. Its commercial performance was therefore entirely dependent on Nolan's name and the film's word of mouth. The pandemic's impact makes it impossible to know how Tenet would have performed in a normal theatrical environment, but pre-pandemic tracking suggested a $400 to $500 million global gross. The Sada Square's appearance in the film is not merely decorative. The square has been found in Roman ruins across Europe, suggesting that the palindrome has existed for nearly 2,000 years. Nolan uses this historical resonance to imply that the knowledge of inversion and Tenet has been circulating through human civilization for millennia, hidden in plain sight. The Opera House siege, the forged painting, the Freeport heist. All of these events are the latest iteration of a temporal conflict that has been ongoing since before recorded history. The film's opening scene at the Kiev Opera House establishes every major theme. The protagonist is undercover. A terrorist siege is occurring. But crucially, among the Ukrainian security forces, there are inverted soldiers moving backward through the auditorium. The bullets that fly back into guns. The masked soldier with the red trinket who saves the protagonist's life. Everything the film will later explain is present in these opening minutes, visible only to viewers who already know what to look for. The temporal mechanics of Tenet have been analyzed by physicists who generally conclude that the film's entropy reversal premise is scientifically incoherent. Entropy is not a force that can be reversed locally while leaving the rest of the universe unaffected. Inverted objects would not simply move backward. They would violate causality at every level. However, Nolan has never claimed scientific accuracy. His goal is emotional and visual, to create a world where time can be fought like an enemy. The film's climax at Stalsk, 12 is shot as a war film, with soldiers running through explosions and engaging in close-quarters combat. But the presence of the blue team moving backward transforms the battle into something unprecedented. Soldiers run backward across the battlefield, taking cover from explosions that are unhappening, shooting enemies who are undying. The effect is disorienting and alien, reinforcing that this is not a conventional war, but a war across time itself. The hypocenter sequence ends with Neil's death. He takes the bullet meant for the protagonist, unlocks the gate, and then collapses. But because Neil is inverted at that moment, his death occurs in reverse from his perspective. He experiences his own death as a sudden revival, a bullet exiting his head, a gate locking behind him. The tragedy is that Neil, unlike the protagonist, experiences his sacrifice twice. Once forward and once backward, knowing exactly what he is choosing. The film's final shot is of the protagonist walking away from the turnstile, watching Neil run toward his death. The camera holds on the protagonist's face, and for the first time in the film, John David Washington's character shows genuine emotion. He is crying. The cipher, the man with no backstory, finally reveals the cost of his mission. He has lost his best friend, and he cannot even tell him. This single shot does more emotional work than all the exposition in the film. Tenet is ultimately a film about friendship. The temporal mechanics, the inverted battles, the algorithm, the dead man's switch. All of these are scaffolding for the relationship between the protagonist and Neil. Neil gives his life because the protagonist asked him to, years in the future, in a conversation that hasn't happened yet. The film asks whether such a friendship, forged across time and paradox, is possible. Its answer is yes, but the price is unbearable. The film's tagline, "Time runs out," appears in marketing materials but not in the film itself. It captures the urgency of the narrative. The algorithm is counting down, Sator's heart is beating toward its final stop, and the protagonist has limited time to save the world. But the tagline also captures the film's tragedy. For Neil, time has already run out. He has been living on borrowed time since he inverted himself to return to the protagonist. Every moment of screen time with Neil is a moment he has stolen from death. Nolan has described Tenet as the film he has been trying to make since Inception. Both films are heist movies built around a single mechanical premise: dream sharing in Inception, time inversion in Tenet. But Inception had Cobb's grief to ground it, while Tenet has only Neil's sacrifice. This is why Tenet feels colder and more abstract. It is Nolan's most purely conceptual film, the one that strips away emotional subplots to focus entirely on the mechanics of its impossible premise. The film's ending is not a happy one. The world is saved, Sator is dead, and Kat is free. But the protagonist has lost Neil, and he will never be able to explain to anyone what Neil did. The Tenet organization will continue, recruiting new agents, fighting the temporal war across centuries. But the protagonist will carry the memory of Neil alone, a friendship that for him is just beginning and for Neil has already ended. For me, Neil says, this is the end of a beautiful friendship. For the protagonist, it is the beginning of a beautiful grief. The film opens with a quotation from the book of Ecclesiastes about time and chance, though this epigraph was cut from the final release, revealing Nolan's original interest in biblical fatalism. The protagonist's survival of the fake suicide pill is the first of many deaths he will metaphorically endure, each one stripping away another layer of his former identity. Nolan has stated that the character's lack of a name is meant to echo classic spy fiction, where operatives are defined solely by their mission, not their personal history. This anonymity also allows the audience to project themselves onto the protagonist more directly than if he had a detailed backstory with parents or past loves. The film's structure deliberately withholds any scene of the protagonist resting or reflecting, pushing him from one crisis to the next without pause. This relentless forward momentum mirrors the entropy inversion premise, as if the protagonist himself is a particle that cannot stop moving. The absence of romantic subplot between the protagonist and Kat is a conscious choice to keep the focus on temporal mechanics rather than emotional entanglement. Some critics have called this cold, but others argue it respects Kat's agency by not forcing a romance where none is needed. The film's color palette shifts between warm Mediterranean tones for the yacht scenes and cold Eastern European grays for the Stalsk, 12 sequences, reinforcing the emotional temperature of each location. Hoyt van Hoytema's cinematography uses natural light whenever possible, with the Oslo Freeport scenes relying on actual Norwegian winter daylight filtered through clouds. The inverted sequences required the camera team to sometimes run their IMAX cameras backward, then reverse the footage in post-production to achieve the correct orientation of motion blur. This technical detail explains why inverted motion in the film has a slightly different quality than normal forward footage, a subtle cue that audiences feel without consciously noticing. The sound design team recorded gunshots and then reversed the audio to create the inverted bullet sounds, adding a layer of authenticity to every temporal transition. Ludwig Göransson composed the score by recording live orchestral performances and then physically reversing the tape, meaning the inverted sections of the film feature music that was literally written backward. This commitment to practical sound design extends to the dialogue, where some lines spoken by inverted characters were recorded backward and then reversed again to create an uncanny vocal quality. The character of Priya, played by Dimple Kapadia, serves as the arms dealer who connects the protagonist to the criminal underworld of temporal technology, though her true allegiance remains ambiguous until the final act. She explains the concept of the temporal pincer movement while standing in a Delhi marketplace, where goods flow both forward and backward through supply chains, mirroring the film's central mechanic. Her death at the protagonist's hands in the final scene is the only time he kills someone in cold blood without operational necessity, showing how his morality has been reshaped by Tenet's logic. The bullet that kills Priya is a normal forward bullet, not an inverted one, emphasizing that the protagonist has returned to conventional action after the temporal chaos of the climax. The scene takes place in the back seat of a moving car, a callback to the film's opening where the protagonist was also a passenger in a vehicle, completing a circular structure. Priya's final words are cut off mid-sentence, denying her the dignity of a complete farewell, which reinforces the film's theme that time does not allow for closure. The protagonist's decision to kill her rather than arrest her shows that Tenet operates outside normal legal frameworks, making him judge, jury, and executioner. This moral ambiguity is never addressed by the film, leaving audiences to decide whether the protagonist has become a hero or simply a more efficient killer. The fact that he kills Priya to protect Kat and her son suggests that family bonds, even those not his own, have become his new moral anchor. The son, Maximilian, never speaks a line of dialogue but appears in several scenes, functioning as a silent symbol of the future that Tenet is fighting to preserve. Sator's treatment of his son mirrors his treatment of time. He wants to control both completely, and he would rather destroy them than lose them. Kat's protection of her son is the only emotional motivation in the film that is never questioned or complicated by temporal paradoxes. The son's presence at the Vietnam yacht scene is what allows Kat to locate the correct moment in time to kill Sator, as she remembers exactly where her son was standing. This small detail rewards attentive viewers who notice that the son's position on the yacht changes between Kat's memory and the actual event. The film's refusal to give the son a name or personality keeps him as a symbol rather than a character, which some critics see as a weakness and others as a deliberate choice to universalize his function. The Oslo Freeport's architecture is designed to resemble a bank vault crossed with an art gallery, reflecting the dual nature of the building as both storage facility and a legal turnstile location. The Rodas company name on the Freeport signage is the only explicit visual reference to the Seda Square's final corner, rewarding viewers who pause the film to examine background details. The first turnstile sequence introduces the concept of temporal doubling, where the protagonist fights a masked figure who is eventually revealed to be his own inverted self from the future. This revelation recontextualizes every punch and kick, as the protagonist realizes he has been fighting himself, a metaphor for the internal struggle of temporal warfare. The scene required John David Washington to learn two completely different fight choreographies, one forward and one backward, then perform them simultaneously with a double who mimicked the inverted movements. The glass divider in the turnstile is made of a material that allows inverted and forward light to pass through differently, creating a slight visual distortion that signals which side of the machine the camera is on. When the protagonist first enters the turnstile, the air pressure changes audibly, a sound effect that recurs every time a character passes through any turnstile in the film. The rotation mechanism of the turnstile is based on actual particle accelerator designs, with Nolan consulting with physicists at Caltech to ensure the visual language was scientifically plausible. The blue and red lighting on either side of the turnstile corresponds to the color coding used throughout the film for forward and inverted teams, respectively. This color system allows audiences to instantly recognize which temporal direction any character is moving, even during chaotic action sequences. The Oslo Freeport security guards are all killed during the heist, but because the heist involves inverted characters, some guards die before the attack begins from their perspective. This paradoxical causality is never explained in dialogue, forcing audiences to accept that in Tenet's world, death can precede its cause. The film's production designer, Nathan Crowley, built the Freeport set on a gimbal that could rotate 360 degrees, allowing the camera to follow characters through the turnstile without cutting. This continuous shot through the rotating machine is one of the film's most technically impressive achievements, requiring perfect timing from actors, camera operators, and the gimbal crew. The blood splatter during the Freeport fight behaves strangely when inverted characters are cut, with droplets moving back toward the wound rather than away from it, a detail only visible on repeat viewings. The Tallinn highway chase was filmed on a closed 8-kilometer stretch of actual Estonian highway, with Nolan rejecting green screen in favor of practical stunts. The inverted BMW was driven by a professional stunt driver who learned to navigate the course in reverse at highway speeds, with all other traffic also moving backward relative to the camera. The moment where the inverted car flips and then unflips was achieved by mounting a car on a hydraulic rig that could rotate 360 degrees while the camera remained stationary. The fireball from the flipped car had to be designed to move inward rather than outward, requiring a specialized pyrotechnic charge that sucked oxygen toward the explosion's center. The scene where the protagonist's side mirror cracks and then uncracks was done with a remote-controlled mirror mechanism that could be activated in reverse order. The radio communication between forward and inverted characters required the sound team to record dialogue in two directions, then layer the tracks so that one side heard gibberish without a decoder. The orange case containing the algorithm piece changes hands multiple times during the chase, each transfer requiring split-second timing between drivers who could not see each other directly. The moment when the protagonist sets the case on fire to prevent Sator from retrieving it is a bluff, as the fire is normal and cannot destroy an inverted object. Sator's ability to interrogate the protagonist while moving backward requires him to ask questions after receiving answers, a paradox that the film simply presents without explanation. The inverted gold bars that Sator receives from the future are engraved with instructions in a language that has not yet been invented, requiring a future translator to decode messages from an even further future. This nested structure of communication suggests that the temporal war involves not just two eras but potentially dozens, each sending messages forward and backward in an endless chain. The film never explains how the future can send physical objects into the past without a turnstile, implying that turnstiles exist in the future as well. The gold bars appear slightly tarnished because their entropy reversal causes them to age in reverse, becoming newer the longer they exist in the past. This visual detail is easy to miss but crucial for understanding that inverted objects have their own unique temporal signatures. The highway chase ends with the protagonist and Neil being captured by Sator's men, but because Neil is inverted at that moment, his capture is actually his rescue from his own perspective. The turnstile in Tallinn is located inside a shipping container that has been converted into a mobile inversion facility, allowing Sator to move his operation across borders without detection. The container's walls are lined with lead to prevent radiation from the turnstile's operation from escaping, a nod to real-world particle accelerator safety protocols. When the protagonist is forced through the turnstile by Sator, he experiences inversion for the first time, and the film shifts to his inverted perspective for an extended sequence. This sequence is the film's most disorienting, as audiences must mentally reverse everything they see, including dialogue that plays backward unless filtered through a forward device. The moment where the protagonist watches his forward self run backward through the turnstile is the film's visual thesis statement, showing the same event from both temporal directions simultaneously. The inverted drive back to Oslo requires the protagonist to wear an oxygen mask, and the film shows his breath freezing on the mask's interior because inverted lungs cannot process normal air correctly. The scene where the protagonist's car moves backward through the wreckage of the earlier chase forces audiences to reevaluate everything they thought they understood about the sequence's causality. The inverted bullet holes in the glass at the Freeport appear to have formed before the gun was fired, a paradox that the film embraces rather than explaining away. When the protagonist fights his forward self for the second time, he now understands that he is both the attacker and the defender, and his strategy shifts to minimizing harm rather than winning. This second Freeport fight is shorter than the first because the inverted protagonist knows exactly how the fight will end, having already experienced it from the other side. The moment where the protagonist removes his mask to confront his forward self is the film's most intimate scene, as a man literally faces himself across time. The two protagonists cannot touch without annihilating, so their fight is a dance of near misses, with fists passing millimeters from faces to avoid contact. The fire suppression system in the Freeport activates during the fight, but the water behaves strangely around inverted bodies, sometimes flowing upward or sideways. This visual effect was achieved by filming water droplets in slow motion and then reversing the footage, creating a liquid that defies gravity in plausible ways. The scene ends with the inverted protagonist escaping into the turnstile to return to forward time, completing a loop that took him approximately 1 hour of subjective time, but several days of objective time. The character of Mihir, played by Himesh Patel, is the Mumbai-based fixer who provides the protagonist with the fake Goya painting and access to Priya's network. Mihir's role is largely expository, but his casual demeanor provides comic relief in a film that otherwise takes itself extremely seriously. He is one of the few characters who never inverts himself, remaining in forward time throughout the entire narrative, which makes him an anchor for audiences confused by temporal shifts. His explanation of the painting forgery involves a discussion of how forgeries are often better than originals because they contain the forger's desire to deceive, a metaphor for the film's own relationship with authenticity. The Goya painting itself is never shown clearly, existing only as a MacGuffin that drives Kat's motivation without requiring the audience to appreciate art history. The heist to steal the painting from the Freeport is the film's only conventional spy sequence, with no inversion involved until the plan goes wrong. Mihir's boat is used to transport the protagonist to the Freeport's seaward side, requiring the crew to navigate Oslo's fjord during winter, with real ice visible in the background of several shots. The scene where Mihir watches the protagonist enter the turnstile and then emerge inverted is the film's clearest explanation of the technology, as Mihir voices the audience's confusion. His reaction to seeing the protagonist moving backward is one of genuine shock, and the actor was instructed not to watch any inverted footage before filming to make his response authentic. Mihir's final scene has him piloting the boat that retrieves the protagonist after the Stalsk 12 battle, providing a rare moment of calm after the film's chaotic climax. He asks no questions about what happened, accepting the temporal madness as simply beyond his understanding, which is the film's ideal audience response. The fact that Mihir survives the film without ever fully understanding the mission suggests that TENET operates on a need-to-know basis, even for its own allies. His character exists to remind viewers that most people in the world of TENET are living normal forward lives, unaware of the temporal war being fought around them. The contrast between Mihir's normalcy and the protagonist's temporal dislocation emphasizes the loneliness of those who choose to invert themselves. Mihir's final line, asking if the protagonist wants a drink, is the film's only moment of ordinary human connection after hours of temporal chaos. The blue team at Stalsk 12 is introduced as already having completed the battle from their perspective, so their briefing consists of them telling the red team what is about to happen. The blue team commander wears his watch backward, a small production detail that signals his inverted orientation without requiring dialogue. The blue team's strategy involves moving away from explosions rather than toward them, as from their perspective, the explosions are implosions that suck matter inward. The moment when the blue team sees the red team moving backward across the battlefield is never shown from their perspective, leaving audiences to imagine how strange that sight must be. The film's decision to follow the red team rather than the blue team during the battle keeps audiences anchored in forward time, making the inverted elements more disorienting. The Blue Team's after-action report includes details about where Red Team members will die, information that Red Team members accept without visible fear or hesitation. This acceptance of predetermined death is the film's most extreme expression of its fatalistic philosophy, as soldiers march toward deaths they already know about. The Blue Team's inverted bullets leave wounds that appear before the gun is fired, meaning medics on the Red Team see injuries that have not yet been inflicted. The temporal logistics of the battle required Nolan to storyboard every shot twice, once from the red perspective and once from the blue, then layer them in editing. The explosions at Stalsk, 12 were designed to look different depending on which direction time was flowing, with inverted explosions featuring debris that moved toward the blast center. The smoke from the explosions behaves strangely around inverted soldiers, sometimes flowing against the wind or forming unnatural patterns in the air. The sound design for the battle layers forward and reversed gunshots, creating an audio landscape where the direction of fire is impossible to determine. The Blue Team's assault on the bunker from the inside out is never shown, but the results are visible as Red Team members find doors already unlocked from the other side. The Hypocenter's design as a buried concrete bunker was inspired by actual Cold War nuclear command centers, with Nolan visiting declassified Soviet sites during pre-production. The locked gate that traps the protagonist and Ives is a simple steel door with a combination lock, emphasizing that the obstacle is mundane rather than technological. The dead soldier who saves them is positioned exactly where Neil will later fall, a spatial consistency that rewards viewers who map the Hypocenter's geography across multiple viewings. The moment when Neil realizes he is the dead soldier is shown through a close-up of his eyes, with Robert Pattinson conveying grief and acceptance without a single line of dialogue. Neil's decision to run back toward the turnstile is filmed in a single continuous shot, emphasizing that this is a choice made in real time without editing tricks to soften the emotional impact. The turnstile Neil runs toward is the same one used by the Blue Team, meaning he has to navigate an active battlefield while moving in the opposite temporal direction from everyone else. The film does not show Neil's death directly, leaving audiences to imagine the bullet entering his head as he unlocks the gate from the wrong side. This off-screen death is more powerful than an explicit depiction would have been, allowing viewers to fill in the horror with their own imaginations. The sound of Neil's death is a single gunshot heard from the protagonist's perspective, a sharp crack that cuts through the chaos of the battle. The protagonist's scream when he sees Neil fall is muted by his oxygen mask, turning his grief into a muffled, animal sound that is somehow more affecting than a clear cry would be. Ives's reaction to Neil's death is to immediately secure the algorithm, showing that TENET operatives are trained to suppress emotion in favor of mission completion. The moment when the protagonist and Ives separate the algorithm into its 9 pieces is shown in quick cuts, emphasizing the mechanical nature of the task rather than the emotional weight of Neil's sacrifice. The burial of the algorithm pieces in nuclear waste sites is described rather than shown, leaving the film's final moments focused on character rather than plot resolution. The protagonist's decision to take one of the algorithm pieces himself, rather than trusting it to Ives, shows that he has learned to trust no one completely. This final act of secrecy ensures that no single person knows where all 9 pieces are hidden, protecting the algorithm even from future versions of the protagonist himself. The Vietnam yacht sequence was filmed on a replica vessel built in a studio tank, with the open ocean backgrounds added digitally to allow for precise control of lighting and weather. Kat's costume in the Vietnam sequence is deliberately similar to what she wore during the happier times of her marriage, creating visual continuity between memory and action. Sator's yacht is named after a Russian word meaning wind, a detail that connects to the film's recurring weather motifs and the unpredictability of temporal forces. The scene where Kat watches her younger self play with her son on the deck is the film's only moment of temporal tourism, where a character simply observes rather than intervenes. Kat's decision to kill Sator while his back is turned is a rejection of the spy genre's conventions, where villains are typically confronted face-to-face before dying. The knife Kat uses is not inverted, meaning its blade behaves normally even as the world around it contains inverted objects, creating a mixed temporal environment. Sator's death occurs off-screen, with the film cutting to his body hitting the deck, a choice that denies him the heroic death he might have wanted. The moment of Sator's death is intercut with the protagonist securing the algorithm, emphasizing that these 2 events must be simultaneous to prevent the dead man's switch from activating. The film's editing during this sequence creates a false sense of simultaneity, as the two events actually occur days apart, but are shown as parallel actions. The yacht's crew does not react to Sater's death immediately because from their perspective, he simply collapsed while looking at the water, with no visible cause. Kat's escape from the yacht involves her diving into the water and swimming to a waiting boat, a literal baptism that washes away her old life as Sater's wife. The water around the yacht contains both normal and inverted waves, a visual effect created by using two different wave machines running in opposite directions. Kat's rescuer is an off-screen TENET operative, showing that the protagonist has arranged for her extraction even as he fights the battle at Stalsk, 12. The final shot of the Vietnam sequence is Kat watching the yacht recede into the distance, her expression unreadable as she contemplates both freedom and the man she killed. The sequence's title card reads Vietnam, 14 days earlier, but the film never specifies which 14 days, leaving the timeline deliberately ambiguous. The character of Ives, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, is the commander of TENET's military operations, a man who has been fighting the temporal war for years before the protagonist joins. Ives's body armor is covered in scratches and bullet marks that have not yet happened from his perspective, because he has already experienced future battles. His dialogue is almost entirely tactical, with no personal revelations or emotional confessions, making him the film's most purely functional character. Ives's relationship with the protagonist is one of mutual respect but not friendship, as both men know that emotional attachments are liabilities in temporal warfare. The scene where Ives explains the rules of the temporal pincer movement is delivered while soldiers prepare for battle, with the noise of gunfire and explosions providing a percussive background. Ives's decision to trust the protagonist with the final piece of the algorithm is based on Neil's recommendation, showing that Neil's opinion carries weight even among hardened veterans. The moment when Ives and the protagonist almost kill each other over possession of the algorithm is defused by Neil, who reminds them that they are on the same side across all temporal directions. Ives's final line, telling the protagonist that they will never speak of what happened, is a classic spy trope that acknowledges the secrecy required by TENET's mission. The fact that Ives survives the film without any personal arc or transformation reinforces that TENET is an organization, not a story about individual heroism. Ives's costume includes a patch with the TENET logo, which is also a palindrome, designed by Nolan to be readable both forward and backward. The logo's design was kept secret until the film's release, with crew members wearing unmarked uniforms during filming to prevent leaks. Ives's weapon of choice is a modified assault rifle that can fire both normal and inverted ammunition, requiring a custom magazine that feeds cartridges in two directions. The sound of Ives's gun changes depending on which ammunition he is using, with inverted rounds producing a distinctive sucking sound rather than a crack. Ives's death is never shown because he does not die in the film, a rarity for characters in Nolan's filmography who typically meet tragic ends. His survival suggests that TENET will continue operating after the credits roll, with Ives training new recruits for missions that have not yet been written. The film's prologue at the Kiev Opera House was shot in an abandoned theater in Tallinn, with Nolan insisting on practical pyrotechnics for the explosion that destroys the stage. The orchestra playing during the siege is performing a real piece of music that was chosen because its tempo matches the rhythm of the inverted gunfire. The moment when the protagonist notices the inverted bullet holes in the theater's wall is a close-up that lasts only 2 seconds. Easy to miss on a first viewing, but crucial for understanding the film's temporal mechanics. The Ukrainian security forces are not actually Ukrainian but Russian operatives working for Sater, a detail revealed only in the film's novelization, not in the movie itself. The inverted soldier who saves the protagonist wears a helmet that conceals his face, but the red trinket on his backpack is visible for exactly 1 second before he turns away. The opera house's architecture includes a circular staircase that is used for an inverted chase sequence, with characters running both up and down simultaneously from different temporal perspectives. The explosion that ends the prologue was achieved with a real explosive charge, and John David Washington was not told exactly when it would detonate to capture his genuine reaction. The sound of the explosion is followed by a moment of complete silence, as the film's audio drops out to simulate the temporary deafness caused by blast trauma. The prologue's final shot is the protagonist looking up at a ceiling that is collapsing in reverse, with debris rising from the floor back toward the roof. This image of temporal reversal is the film's thesis statement, presented before any character has explained what inversion means. The prologue establishes that the protagonist is willing to die for his mission, as he swallows the suicide pill without hesitation when capture seems inevitable. The pill is revealed to be fake, but the protagonist did not know that, meaning his willingness to die was genuine and not performative. This willingness to sacrifice himself is what makes him suitable for TENET, as the organization requires operatives who value the mission above their own lives. The prologue's title card reads Kiev Opera House Siege, but the film never returns to Ukraine, leaving the siege's aftermath completely unexplored. The unanswered questions about the Opera House siege are intentional, as Nolan wanted audiences to feel the same disorientation as the protagonist, who is never fully briefed on any mission. The film's score by Ludwig Göransson includes a hidden track that plays only during the end credits, featuring reversed vocals that spell out TENET when played backward. Göransson composed the score by first writing forward melodies, then inverting them to create the backward passages, and then sometimes inverting them again for the most disorienting sequences. The percussion in the score was recorded by hitting objects with mallets in reverse motion, then playing the recordings forward to create sounds that cannot be produced by normal striking techniques. The brass section was recorded in a concrete bunker to create a cavernous echo that suggests the interior of the hypocenter. The score's main theme is built on a 5-note sequence that is also a palindrome, with the same notes ascending and descending regardless of direction. Göransson has stated that he wanted the music to function like a turnstile, sounding different, but somehow the same when played backward. The film's sound team created a custom audio format for IMAX theaters that routed different temporal layers to different speakers, allowing forward and inverted sounds to be spatially separated. The dialogue in inverted scenes was recorded twice, once normally and once with the actor speaking backward, then layered so that forward audiences could barely understand the inverted speech. The sound of inverted breathing through oxygen masks was created by recording normal breathing and then reversing the audio, adding a subtle wheeze to every mask scene. The film's final mix includes sub-bass frequencies below the threshold of human hearing, designed to be felt as physical vibration in theaters with proper subwoofer systems. The decision to make the dialogue sometimes unintelligible was a creative choice by Nolan, who wanted audiences to lean forward and strain to hear, increasing engagement with the film's mysteries. The sound of the turnstile rotating is a combination of industrial machinery recordings and reverse train brakes, creating a noise that is both mechanical and organic. The inverted gunshots feature a distinctive pre-crack, where the air is sucked toward the gun before the bullet is fired, a sound effect that plays in reverse of normal gunfire. The film's audio was mastered for home viewing with dynamic range compression, but Nolan has urged audiences to watch with uncompressed audio to experience the full range of frequencies. The score's final note is held for 30 seconds after the image fades to black, forcing audiences to sit in silence and process what they have just witnessed. The film's costume design by Jeffrey Corland uses color to indicate temporal orientation, with forward characters wearing warm colors and inverted characters wearing cool colors. The protagonist's wardrobe shifts from browns and tans in the first half to blues and grays after he inverts himself, reflecting his changing relationship to time. Neil's costume includes a wool overcoat that is always slightly disheveled, suggesting that he has been traveling through time for years without proper wardrobe maintenance. Seta's suits are all bespoke and immaculately pressed, reflecting his need for control and his wealth from future gold. Kat's costumes become progressively darker as the film continues, starting with light summer dresses on the yacht and ending with black tactical gear at Stalsk, 12. The inverted soldiers at the Opera House wear helmets that are actually modified World War II Soviet designs, a subtle hint that temporal warfare has been happening for decades. The oxygen masks used by inverted characters are based on actual military aviation masks, but modified to include a one-way valve that prevents outside air from entering. The masks fog up from the inside during inverted scenes because warm inverted breath meets cold normal air, creating condensation that behaves strangely on camera. The TENET organization's uniforms feature no national insignia, reflecting the group's existence outside normal geopolitical structures. The red and blue armbands worn by the two teams at Stalsk, 12 are the only identifiers that distinguish friend from foe in the temporal chaos of the battle. The film's costume department created multiple versions of each uniform, some with forward entropy fabric and some with reverse stitching that would theoretically invert if the technology existed. The bulletproof vests worn by TENET operatives are lined with a material that can stop both normal and inverted bullets, though the film never explains how this material functions. The scratches on Ives's armor were applied by hand in reverse order, so that the oldest scratches appear newest from his temporal perspective. The film's hairstyling keeps the protagonist's hair slightly longer in inverted scenes, as if time has been passing differently for him than for the forward world. The costume detail most noticed by fans is Neil's backpack, which is a vintage model that would have been obsolete when the film was released, suggesting it was purchased in a different era entirely. The film's visual effects supervisor, Andrew Jackson, won an Academy Award for his work on TENET, specifically for the inverted car chase and the temporal pincer battle. The inverted explosions were achieved by filming normal explosions at 5,000 frames per second, then reversing the footage and compositing it into scenes shot at normal speed. The moment where an inverted soldier runs backward through a door that then unbrakes was done with a practical door rigged with explosive bolts that could be triggered in reverse order. The scene where the inverted protagonist's footprints appear before he walks was achieved by having John David Washington walk backward, while a crew member used a leaf blower to create footprints in sand. The visual effects team developed new software specifically for TENET to handle the complex lighting calculations required for scenes with both forward and inverted light sources. The turnstile's rotating mechanism was built practically for close-up shots, with the glass panels made of a custom material that could be backlit with red or blue LEDs. The moment where the protagonist sees himself through the turnstile glass required two John David Washingtons to be filmed separately and then composited, with the glass reflection added digitally. The hypocenter's underground setting was created by building a practical set and then extending it digitally with cavern walls that suggest a natural cave formation. The algorithm's 9 pieces are never shown clearly, existing as blurry shapes in metal cases, because Nolan wanted the device to remain mysterious rather than technological. The visual effects team created over 500 shots for the film, fewer than most blockbusters, because Nolan prefers practical effects whenever possible. The shot where an inverted bullet flies from a wall back into a gun required the prop team to build a gun with a reverse-firing mechanism that could actually suck a bullet inward. The bullet's trajectory was achieved by attaching a thin wire to the bullet and pulling it backward at high speed, then digitally removing the wire in post-production. The impact marks on walls where inverted bullets have struck were painted on before the bullet was fired, creating a reverse causality that the camera captures literally. The visual effect of inverted water was achieved by filming water droplets in zero gravity on a parabolic flight, then reversing the footage to create droplets that defy gravity convincingly. The film's final visual effect is a subtle one. The TENET logo fades in and then fades out, but the fade-out is the reverse of the fade-in, a palindrome in motion that closes the film as it opened. The film's relationship to James Bond is explicit, with Nolan citing the Bond films as a major influence on TENET's structure and tone. The protagonist's globe-trotting mission, from Ukraine to London to Mumbai to Tallinn to Oslo to Vietnam, mirrors Bond's itinerary in films like From Russia with Love. Sator is a Bond villain in every respect, a wealthy oligarch with a physical deformity, cancer, a remote lair, the yacht and the hypocenter, and a doomsday device, the algorithm. Kat is a Bond girl archetype, the beautiful woman trapped in a relationship with the villain, who ultimately helps the hero and kills the villain herself. Neil is a Bond ally archetype, the charming, capable operative who provides exposition and saves the hero at critical moments. The film's score includes moments that directly quote the Bond theme's rhythm, though Göransson has denied intentional plagiarism. The scene where the protagonist meets Priya in a Mumbai high-rise is visually identical to Bond meeting a contact in a similar location in Skyfall. The film's title sequence, designed by the same company that created the Bond title sequences, features silhouetted figures moving both forward and backward through a tunnel of light. The difference between TENET and Bond is that Bond films end with the villain defeated and the world saved, while TENET ends with the hero grieving a friend he cannot save. Nolan has stated that he wanted to make a Bond film, but was never offered the franchise, so he created his own with temporal mechanics instead. The film's coldness compared to Bond is intentional, as Nolan wanted to explore what a spy would actually be like without the charm and wit that Bond possesses. The protagonist's lack of one-liners and sexual conquests makes him a more realistic spy, but also a less entertaining one for audiences accustomed to Bond's swagger. The film's violence is more brutal and less stylized than Bond's, with deaths occurring suddenly and without heroic music. The relationship between the protagonist and Kat is entirely professional, unlike Bond's relationships with his leading ladies, which almost always become romantic. The film's ending, where the protagonist walks away alone into the night, is a deliberate inversion of Bond's typical ending, where he walks away with a woman on his arm. The film's philosophical themes extend beyond time into questions of free will, determinism, and the nature of heroism. The mantra, "What's happened, happened," is a statement of philosophical determinism, the belief that all events are predetermined and cannot be changed. The protagonist's actions throughout the film are therefore not choices in the traditional sense, but rather the unfolding of a predetermined timeline. This determinism raises uncomfortable questions about moral responsibility. If the protagonist cannot change the past, can he be praised for saving the world? The film's answer seems to be that intention matters more than outcome, as the protagonist acts as if his choices matter even when he knows they are predetermined. The character of Neil embodies this paradox perfectly, as he chooses to die knowing that he has already made that choice in his own personal past. The film rejects the concept of multiple timelines or parallel universes, a common trope in time travel fiction that Nolan finds philosophically cowardly. By embracing a single fixed timeline, Tenet forces its characters to confront the tragedy of existence without the comfort of alternate possibilities. The future generations' plan to erase the past is a metaphor for suicide, as destroying one's ancestors is equivalent to destroying oneself. Sata's willingness to end the world is an expression of nihilism, the belief that existence has no meaning and therefore no value. The protagonist's opposition to Sata is therefore a defense of meaning itself, an assertion that even in a deterministic universe, life is worth preserving. The film's title, Tenet, refers not just to the organization, but to the core belief that holds the universe together. The belief that actions have consequences even when those consequences precede their causes. The scientists who invented the algorithm and then broke it into pieces are the film's true heroes, as they chose to sacrifice their own futures to protect the past. The future generation's decision to communicate with Sata rather than with a more ethical figure is never explained, suggesting that the future has its own satyrs. The film's final message is that heroism consists of acting correctly within a deterministic framework, not of changing fate, but of fulfilling it with dignity and courage. The protagonist's tears at the end are not tears of regret, but tears of acceptance, as he embraces a future he already knows will include Neil's death. The film's production challenges included filming on 7 different countries, coordinating schedules across 3 continents, and managing a crew of over 500 people. The COVID-19 pandemic shut down production during post-production, forcing Nolan to complete the film's sound mix and visual effects from his home editing suite. The film's release date was delayed 3 times, with Warner Brothers eventually deciding to release it in theaters despite the pandemic rather than delaying it further. Nolan's insistence on a theatrical release became a major news story, with the director writing an op-ed in the Washington Post defending cinema as a communal experience. The film's box office performance was closely watched by the industry as an indicator of whether audiences would return to theaters after lockdowns. The film's disappointing gross led Warner Brothers to abandon theatrical windows entirely for their 2021 slate, releasing all films simultaneously on HBO Max. Nolan publicly criticized Warner Brothers. The film's home video release included extensive behind-the-scenes featurettes explaining the practical effects and temporal mechanics. The 4K Blu-ray release features an IMAX aspect ratio for the entire film, unlike the theatrical version which switched between ratios. Nolan recorded a commentary track for the home release in which he explains his intentions for each scene, though he refuses to answer specific questions about plot mechanics. The commentary track reveals that the film's working title was Merry-Go-Round, a reference to the circular structure of the narrative. Nolan has stated that he wrote the screenplay for Tenet over 5 years, making it his longest writing process for any film. The screenplay was kept in a locked safe when not in use, with only cast members allowed to read the complete script. The film's novelization, written by the same author who novelized Inception, includes additional scenes that clarify some of the film's temporal mechanics. The novelization reveals that Neil's real name is never known even to the protagonist, as Neil is a code name chosen for its palindromic properties. The film's legacy in popular culture includes countless YouTube videos explaining the plot, with some running longer than the film itself. The phrase, "don't try to understand it, feel it," has become a meme, used to dismiss confusing plot points in other films. The film's inversion mechanic has been analyzed by physicists who generally agree that it is scientifically impossible, but conceptually fascinating. The film's failure to win any major awards despite its technical achievements is often cited as evidence of the Academy's bias against science fiction. The film's soundtrack has been streamed over 100 million times on Spotify, making it Garanson's most popular score after Black Panther. The red trinket on Neil's backpack has become a symbol of the film's hidden details, with fans creating merchandise featuring the string. The film's costume designer has revealed that the red string is actually a shoelace, chosen because it would be easily identifiable even in low light. The moment where Neil's trinket is visible in the Opera House prologue is only 1 second long, making it the film's most famous Easter egg. The film's ending has been interpreted by some viewers as a sequel hook, though Nolan has stated that he has no plans for a Tenet sequel. The film's ambiguous timeline has generated fan theories that the protagonist is actually an older version of Neil, though Nolan has denied this theory explicitly. The theory that Kat's son grows up to become Neil is also popular, though it contradicts the film's dialogue about Neil being recruited by the protagonist in the future. The film's opening shot of a bullet unfiring from a wall has been analyzed frame by frame, with viewers discovering that the bullet hole appears before the bullet moves. This visual paradox, captured practically rather than digitally, is the film's purest expression of its temporal philosophy. The film's final shot, of the protagonist's face as he watches Neil run to his death, has been called the most emotional moment in any Nolan film by some critics. The fact that this emotion comes after 2.5 hours of cold mechanics makes it feel earned rather than manipulative, a reward for audiences who have paid attention. The film's structural relationship to Memento, Nolan's earlier film about memory disorder, is often overlooked by critics who focus on Inception instead. Both films are built around a central gimmick that inverts the audience's relationship to narrative time, forcing viewers to construct the story backward. Memento uses reverse chronology to simulate the protagonist's memory loss, while Tenet uses inversion to simulate the experience of moving backward through time. Both films end with a revelation that recontextualizes everything that came before, requiring a second viewing to fully appreciate. The difference is that Memento is about a man trying to find meaning in a world he cannot remember, while Tenet is about a man trying to find meaning in a world he cannot change. Nolan has stated that Tenet is the film he wanted to make after Memento, but lacked the budget and technology to realize. The film's use of practical effects over CGI is a continuation of Nolan's career-long commitment to shooting as much in camera as possible. The film's lack of handheld camera work, with every shot on a tripod or Steadicam, gives it a classical feel that contrasts with the chaotic subject matter. The film's editing by Jennifer Lame, who also edited Marriage Story, uses cross-cutting to create false simultaneity between events that occur days apart. Lame has stated that the film's temporal complexity required her to create a physical map of the timeline on her office wall, with different colored strings representing different characters' paths. The film's color grading shifts subtly during inverted scenes, with blues becoming more saturated and reds becoming more muted. This color shift was applied in the digital intermediate rather than in camera, allowing Nolan to adjust the intensity scene by scene. The film's final color grade was completed just days before the premiere, with Nolan working through the night to approve each shot. The film's theatrical projection required special equipment to handle the IMAX aspect ratio shifts, with some theaters unable to show the film correctly. Nolan has stated that the ideal way to watch Tenet is on 70mm IMAX film, as digital projection cannot reproduce the full range of colors and contrast. The film's 70mm prints weigh over 600 pounds each and require a specially trained projectionist to thread them through the projector. Only 25 theaters worldwide were equipped to show Tenet in 70mm IMAX, creating a scarcity that made those screenings events for dedicated fans. The film's digital release includes a warning that it was designed for theatrical viewing and may not display correctly on all home systems. This warning has been criticized as elitist, but Nolan has defended it as an honest statement about the film's visual requirements. The film's exploration of entropy extends beyond physics into social entropy, the breakdown of social structures and trust that characterizes the film's world. The protagonist's inability to trust anyone fully, including Neil, is a symptom of a world where allies can be inverted enemies from a different temporal direction. The film's spy thriller framework is ideally suited to explore this theme, as the spy genre is fundamentally about the impossibility of trust in a world of deception. The character of Priya, who sells weapons to both sides, represents the amorality of arms dealers who profit from conflict without caring about outcomes. Sator's wealth from future gold makes him a symbol of oligarchic power that exists outside normal economic systems, accountable to no government. The future generation's willingness to destroy the past is an allegory for climate change denial, where present actions have future consequences that present generations refuse to acknowledge. The film's message about climate change is pessimistic. The future is already dying, and no amount of heroic action in the present can fully reverse the damage. The algorithm itself is a metaphor for nuclear weapons, a technology that could end the world and that has been hidden in pieces by scientists who regretted their creation. The film's portrayal of scientists as morally responsible, unlike the military and political figures who would use their discoveries for destruction, is a recurring theme in Nolan's work. The scientist who invented the algorithm is never named or shown, making her a symbol of collective guilt rather than an individual villain. The decision to hide the algorithm in nuclear waste sites is ironic, as those sites represent the ecological damage that motivates the future's attack. The film's characters never discuss the morality of the future's plan in depth, accepting that destroying the past is wrong without needing to argue the point. This lack of moral debate reflects the film's action-oriented nature, where characters act on instinct rather than deliberation. The protagonist's final speech to Priya, explaining why he must kill her, is the film's only explicit moral argument, and it lasts less than 30 seconds. The argument is simple. Priya would kill a mother and child to protect the secret of TENET, and the protagonist cannot allow that. This moral clarity in the final scene contrasts with the ambiguity of everything that came before, suggesting that some ethical principles transcend temporal complexity. The film's opening scene at the Kiev Opera House establishes the concept of temporal hostages, where innocent people are trapped between forward and inverted forces. The terrorists believe they are holding the audience for ransom, but in truth, both the terrorists and the security forces are pawns in Sator's larger temporal scheme. The inverted bullet holes in the theater's wall are ignored by the Ukrainian police, who cannot process what they are seeing because their brains are not trained for temporal anomalies. This detail suggests that ordinary people in the world of TENET experience inverted events as glitches in perception, quickly forgotten or rationalized away. The protagonist's ability to notice the inverted bullet holes is what marks him as suitable for TENET recruitment, as his mind is flexible enough to accept impossible phenomena. The opera house's circular architecture, with its concentric balconies and curved staircases, visually echoes the palindrome structure of the film's title. The chandelier that falls during the siege is suspended by cables that are later shown to be cut in reverse, a detail visible only to viewers who compare the prologue to later inverted scenes. The audience members at the opera are never seen again in the film, their fates unknown, making them symbols of the civilian casualties that occur in any temporal war. The Ukrainian SWAT team that storms the opera house includes at least one inverted operative who moves backward through the crowd, bumping into people who feel the contact before he arrives. The sound design during the prologue places the audience inside the opera hall, with gunfire echoing off marble walls and the orchestra's music muffled by the chaos. The tenor singing on stage continues his performance even as bullets fly, a detail that emphasizes the absurdity of artistic creation continuing during destruction. The moment when the protagonist takes the fake suicide pill is filmed in extreme close-up, with Washington's eyes showing a mixture of fear and resignation. The pill's casing is made of a material that dissolves in stomach acid, but the fake pill contains a harmless sedative that knocks the protagonist unconscious rather than killing him. The train tracks visible from the protagonist's window during his recovery at the windmill farm are a visual callback to the railway imagery in Nolan's earlier film, Inception. The windmill farm itself is located in Denmark, chosen because its rotating blades create a visual rhythm that matches the film's temporal heartbeat. The character of Crosby, played by Michael Caine in a cameo appearance, is a British intelligence officer who provides the protagonist with information about Sator's past. Crosby's office is filled with antique clocks that all show different times, a visual representation of time's subjective nature across different temporal perspectives. Michael Caine has appeared in every Nolan film since Batman Begins, and his cameo in Tenet continues this tradition while lasting less than 2 minutes of screen time. Crosby's dialogue reveals that Seda was born in a closed Soviet city that no longer appears on any map, a detail that establishes the character's connection to hidden histories. The photograph Crosby shows the protagonist depicts young Seda standing in front of a nuclear reactor, with radiation burns visible on his exposed skin. These burns explain Seder's terminal cancer, as he grew up in an environment contaminated by nuclear waste and negligent Soviet safety protocols. Crosby mentions that Seder's father was a plant worker who died of radiation poisoning, establishing a family history of slow death by environmental neglect. The intelligence briefing includes a map of Stalsk, 12, marked with red dots indicating where future gold has been discovered over the past 30 years. Crosby explains that the future has been communicating with Seder since his childhood, sending instructions and resources to cultivate him as their agent. The idea of a villain created by future intervention is a reversal of the classic spy trope, where villains are products of past trauma. Crosby's final piece of intelligence is the location of Seder's yacht in Vietnam, a detail that will prove crucial for Kat's assassination plan. The scene ends with Crosby offering the protagonist a drink, which he declines, a small moment that emphasizes the character's professional focus over social pleasantries. Michael Caine's performance in Tenet is notably more subdued than his roles in other Nolan films, as Crosby is a bureaucrat rather than a mentor figure. The clock on Crosby's wall that shows the correct time is the only one without a visible brand, suggesting it is the only reliable timepiece in the room. Crosby's office is located in a London basement with no windows, a deliberate choice to isolate him from the natural cycles of day and night that normal people experience. The film's treatment of the color red and blue extends beyond the turnstile lighting into the costumes, production design, and even the color grading of specific scenes. Red is associated with forward time, the team that attacks from 10 o'clock to midnight, and the normal flow of entropy from order to disorder. Blue is associated with inverted time, the team that attacks from midnight back to 10 o'clock, and the reversed flow of entropy from disorder to order. The protagonist's clothing shifts from warm earth tones in his forward scenes to cool grays and blues after his first inversion at the Oslo Freeport. Seder's yacht features red trim on the exterior, but blue upholstery in the interior, reflecting the character's position as a broker between forward and inverted worlds. The algorithm's 9 pieces are stored in cases that are alternately red and blue, though the film never explains which color corresponds to which temporal orientation. The oxygen masks worn by inverted characters have blue straps, while the forward characters who wear masks for other reasons have black straps. The Tenet organization's logo is presented in both red and blue versions, depending on whether the character displaying it is currently moving forward or backward. The final battle at Stalsk, 12 uses red smoke grenades for the forward team and blue smoke grenades for the inverted team, allowing audiences to track temporal orientation at a glance. The hypocenter's interior lighting shifts from red to blue as the bomb countdown progresses, indicating that the algorithm's activation will invert the entire space. Kat's dress on the yacht is white, a neutral color that reflects her position as someone who has not yet chosen a temporal side. The forged Goya painting is described as having a red background, though the film never shows the painting clearly enough for audiences to verify this detail. Neil's backpack is olive green, a military color that does not align with either temporal palette, reflecting his unique position as someone who has lived through both directions. The turnstile's rotating mechanism is made of brushed steel with no color, suggesting that the machine itself is neutral and only its lighting indicates temporal orientation. The film's final shot of the protagonist's face is lit by both red and blue sources simultaneously, indicating that he has become a master of both temporal directions. This color coding system allows audiences to watch Tenet without dialogue and still understand which temporal direction each character is moving. The film's narrative structure follows a chiasmus, a literary device where the second half mirrors the first half in reverse order, like the letters X or the shape of a palindrome. The Opera House prologue is mirrored by the Stalsk, 12 epilogue, both being large-scale military operations involving hostages and inverted soldiers. The Mumbai meeting with Priya is mirrored by the final confrontation with Priya, both occurring in the back seats of moving vehicles in crowded streets. The Oslo-Freeport heist is mirrored by the second Oslo-Freeport heist, with the same location and same turnstile, but different temporal orientations for the participants. The Tallinn highway chase is mirrored by the inverted drive from Tallinn back to Oslo, with the same locations experienced in reverse order. The introduction of Kat on Sater's yacht is mirrored by Kat's assassination of Sater on the same yacht, with the same furniture and same crew, but different emotional stakes. The scene where the protagonist first learns about inversion from the scientist is mirrored by Neil's final explanation of the temporal loop, both being expository conversations that occur in sterile environments. The torture scene where Sater interrogates the protagonist is mirrored by the protagonist's interrogation of Priya, with the power dynamics reversed in each case. The moment when the protagonist swallows the fake suicide pill is mirrored by Neil's real death, both being acts of self-sacrifice for the mission. The film's midpoint, where the protagonist inverts himself for the first time, is the fulcrum of the chiasmus, the point where the narrative begins to mirror itself. This structural choice means that every line of dialogue in the second half has a corresponding line in the first half, though the meanings change with context. The chiasmus structure is why the film feels more coherent on second viewing, as audiences recognize the mirroring patterns they missed the first time. Nolan has stated that he wrote the screenplay using a spreadsheet that mapped each scene to its mirror scene, ensuring perfect symmetry throughout. The chiasmus structure is also why the film's runtime feels both too long and too short, as the second half compresses events that the first half expanded. The film's emotional payoff depends entirely on the chiasmus, as Neil's sacrifice only lands because audiences have spent the first half building a relationship with his character. The final shot of the protagonist's crying face is the mirror of the opening shot of his determined face, showing how the mission has transformed him across the film's temporal loop. The film's sound design includes a technique called temporal audio layering, where forward and inverted sounds are mixed into the same frequency spectrum. The sound of a normal gunshot occupies the mid-range frequencies, while an inverted gunshot occupies the low and high frequencies simultaneously. This frequency separation allows audiences to hear both temporal directions without the sounds canceling each other out, a technical achievement that required custom audio software. The sound of the turnstile rotating includes both the forward sound of the mechanism and the reverse sound of the same mechanism playing simultaneously. The dialogue spoken by inverted characters is filtered through a digital processor that removes the reversed consonants while preserving the reversed vowels. This processing creates a vocal quality that sounds like a language the audience almost understands, reflecting the character's own disorientation. The score's percussion track was recorded with microphones placed inside the drums, capturing the sound of the drumhead being struck from the inside rather than the outside. When this recording is reversed, it sounds like the drum is inhaling rather than exhaling, a subtle effect that most audiences feel rather than notice. The film's ambient sound in inverted scenes includes bird calls played backward, wind that moves from the microphone outward, and footsteps that precede the walker. The sound of inverted rain was achieved by recording rain falling upward, created by throwing buckets of water into the air and reversing the audio. The film's final mix includes infrasound frequencies below 20 Hz, which cannot be heard but can be felt as physical pressure in the chest. This infrasound creates a sense of unease during inverted scenes, mimicking the body's natural response to temporal dislocation. The sound of the algorithm activating is a rising tone that never resolves to a final pitch, suggesting infinite acceleration rather than completion. The film's audio was mixed for Dolby Atmos, a format that places sounds in three-dimensional space rather than simply left and right channels. In Atmos theaters, inverted sounds can be placed above the audience while forward sounds remain at ear level, creating spatial separation between temporal directions. The home video release includes a standard 5.1 mix, which Nolan has called a compromise necessary for home viewing, but inferior to the theatrical experience. The film's visual effects team developed a technique called temporal compositing, where multiple layers of the same scene from different temporal perspectives are combined into a single image. The scene where the protagonist fights himself in the Oslo Freeport required 3 layers: the forward protagonist, the inverted protagonist, and the background that remained neutral. Each layer was filmed separately, with the actors performing their choreography in isolation while staring at markers representing their future selves. The glass of the turnstile had to be added digitally because practical glass would have reflected the camera crew during the separate filming passes. The reflections in the glass are the most complex visual effect in the film, as they show the protagonist seeing himself from the opposite temporal direction. The scene where the protagonist watches himself enter the turnstile from the other side required a split-screen effect, with the two halves filmed weeks apart. The lighting had to be matched perfectly between the two filming sessions, requiring the cinematographer to document every light position and intensity. The moment where the two protagonists almost touch but pull away at the last second was achieved with two actors performing the same movement in opposite directions. The visual effect of their hands passing through the same space without contact required digital painting to remove any accidental overlap. The explosion at the Stalsk 12 bunker entrance was filmed with multiple cameras running at different frame rates, then composited together in reverse order. The debris from the explosion includes pieces of the bunker's concrete walls, which were painted blue on one side to identify them as inverted fragments. The digital team had to track every piece of debris individually, ensuring that each piece's trajectory was physically plausible in both temporal directions. The film's final shot of Neil running back toward the turnstile required no visual effects, as Pattinson actually ran backward through the set while the camera moved forward. This practical approach gives the moment a physical reality that digital effects cannot replicate, making Neil's sacrifice feel more immediate and tragic. The film's visual effects supervisor has stated that the most difficult shot was the inverted car unflipping, which required 3 months of development and testing before filming began. The film's production designer, Nathan Crowley, created a visual language where every location has a double, mirroring the film's temporal structure. The Kiev Opera House is mirrored by the Stalsk 12 bunker, both being performance spaces where the audience is trapped by forces they cannot understand. The Mumbai high-rise where Priya lives is mirrored by the Oslo Freeport, both being vertical structures that contain hidden temporal technology. The Tallinn Highway is mirrored by the inverted drive back to Oslo, with the same road signs and landmarks appearing in reverse order. Sada's yacht is mirrored by the hypocenter, both being enclosed spaces where a countdown determines the fate of the world. The windmill farm where the protagonist recovers is mirrored by the turnstile facility in Tallinn, both being industrial sites where energy is transformed from one form to another. The London restaurant where the protagonist meets Crosby is mirrored by the Oslo restaurant where Kat confronts Sadar about the forged painting. The shipping container that houses the Tallinn turnstile is mirrored by the shipping container that houses the Blue Team's forward base at Stalsk 12. The scientist's laboratory where inversion is first explained is mirrored by the TENET briefing room where the temporal pincer movement is explained. The car where the protagonist is tortured by Sadar is mirrored by the car where the protagonist kills Priya, both being confined spaces where violence occurs. The airport hangar at Oslo is mirrored by the military hangar at Stalsk 12, both being transitional spaces between normal and inverted time. Crowley has stated that he designed each pair of mirrored locations using the same architectural plans, but rotated 180 degrees. This rotation means that the left side of the opera house becomes the right side of the bunker, mirroring the temporal inversion of the film's structure. The color palette of each location inverts in its mirror, with warm tones in the first half becoming cool tones in the second half. The furniture in each mirrored location is arranged in reverse order, with the sofa on the left in the first half appearing on the right in the second half. This attention to architectural detail rewards viewers who watch the film multiple times, as they discover symmetries that are invisible on first viewing. The film's costume designer created a system where each character's clothing ages in reverse during inverted scenes, requiring multiple versions of each costume. The protagonist's suit becomes progressively cleaner as he moves backward through time, as his personal entropy decreases while the world's entropy increases around him. Neil's overcoat shows where patterns that suggest he has been traveling backward for years, with the elbows worn thin and the collar frayed. Sadar's suits are always immaculate because he never inverts himself, remaining in forward time throughout the film despite his communication with the future. Kat's costumes become less restrictive as the film progresses, starting with tight designer dresses and ending with loose tactical gear. The soldiers at Stalsk 12 wear uniforms that have been artificially distressed in reverse, with bullet holes appearing before the battle rather than after. The oxygen masks worn by inverted characters have condensation patterns that form on the inside of the glass, requiring the prop department to apply artificial fog before each take. The inverted character's breath is visible in cold scenes, but the breath moves toward their mouths rather than away from them, a detail created with reverse airflow fans. The bullet wounds on inverted characters appear as healed scars that then open into bleeding wounds as time moves forward from their perspective. The makeup department had to apply inverted wounds in reverse order, starting with the healed scar and then adding blood that would be removed during filming. The blood packs used for inverted characters were designed to suck blood back into the body rather than ejecting it, requiring a vacuum pump hidden in the costume. The fight choreography for inverted characters required them to pull punches rather than throw them, creating the illusion that they are being struck by forces from the future. The bruises on inverted characters appear before the fight that causes them, requiring makeup artists to predict where each actor would be hit. The film's hair department had to style inverted characters' hair to move against gravity, using hairspray that dried in the opposite direction of normal styling. The overall effect of these costume and makeup choices is that inverted characters look slightly wrong in ways that audiences cannot consciously identify, but can feel subconsciously. The film's script went through 17 drafts before filming began, with Nolan writing and rewriting each scene to ensure temporal consistency. The first draft was over 400 pages long, twice the length of the final shooting script, and included scenes that were eventually cut for pacing reasons. The cut scenes included a subplot about a rival temporal organization called the Turnstile Group that was removed because it confused test audiences. Another cut scene showed the protagonist's childhood, revealing that he was orphaned during a temporal accident, which would have given him a personal motivation for joining TENET. Nolan removed this backstory because he wanted the protagonist to remain a cipher, motivated by duty rather than trauma. The script originally included a romantic relationship between the protagonist and Kat, with a love scene on the yacht that was cut after Elizabeth Debicki expressed concerns about its necessity. The film's ending originally showed the protagonist founding TENET in the past, recruiting a young Neil, and then inverting himself to begin the film's loop. This ending was changed during filming because Nolan realized it would make the temporal mechanics too explicit, reducing the film's mystery. The dialogue explaining the Zeta Square was originally delivered by Crosby, but was moved to the scientist character to balance the expository load across multiple characters. The scene where Neil reveals that he was recruited by the protagonist in the future was added during reshoots, as test audiences needed a clearer emotional payoff for Neil's sacrifice. The film's title was originally The Twilight World, but Nolan changed it to TENET after discovering the Zeta Square during research for the script. The palindrome structure of the title allowed Nolan to design the entire film around the concept of temporal symmetry, with each scene having a mirror scene in the opposite temporal direction. The script includes stage directions that describe the temporal orientation of each character in every scene, allowing the crew to track who is moving forward and who is moving backward. Nolan wrote these stage directions in a color-coded system, with red ink for forward scenes and blue ink for inverted scenes, which he carried onto the set during filming. The shooting script was printed on paper that was half red and half blue, with the binding in the middle so that the script could be read from either direction. This physical script design allowed Nolan to hand the script to actors and say, "Read it from the other side," when they needed to understand their inverted characters' perspectives. The film's casting process involved screen tests where actors had to perform fight choreography both forward and backward to demonstrate their physical adaptability. John David Washington was Nolan's first choice for the protagonist after Nolan saw him in the film BlacKkKlansman, where Washington played an undercover operative with a similar intensity. Robert Pattinson auditioned for the role of Neil by reading a scene that was not in the final film, where Neil explains why he chose to work for TENET despite knowing he would die. Kenneth Branagh was cast as Sator after Nolan saw him play a similar oligarch in the television series Wallander, where Branagh portrayed a man consumed by his work at the expense of his family. Elizabeth Debicki was chosen for Kat because of her height, which Nolan wanted to emphasize Kat's physical intimidation by the shorter Sator despite her greater stature. The supporting cast includes several actors from previous Nolan films, including Himesh Patel from Dunkirk and Aaron Taylor-Johnson from the unused Nolan-produced Superman project. Dimple Kapadia was cast as Priya after Nolan saw her performance in the Indian film Dil Chahta Hai, where she played a woman navigating complex social dynamics with quiet intelligence. The actor playing the scientist who explains inversion, Clement's poesy, was chosen because of her ability to deliver complex technical dialogue without sounding like she was reciting a physics textbook. The child actor playing Kat's son was cast for his resemblance to Elizabeth Debicki, as Nolan wanted the family resemblance to be immediately apparent to audiences. The Ukrainian SWAT team members were played by actual Ukrainian Special Forces veterans, who taught the cast how to clear rooms and handle weapons realistically. The inverted soldiers at the Opera House were played by dancers rather than actors, as Nolan needed performers who could move backward through choreography without looking clumsy. The tenor singing at the Opera House is played by an actual opera singer who learned to perform his aria while dodging simulated gunfire and explosions. The film's dialect coach worked with each actor to develop a unique speech pattern that would remain consistent across forward and inverted scenes. Washington developed a staccato delivery for the protagonist, with short phrases and abrupt pauses, that contrasts with Pattinson's more fluid and lyrical speech patterns. Branagh adopted a Russian accent that becomes more pronounced when Sator is angry, a detail that the actor developed during rehearsals to show the character's loss of control. The film's voice coach had to teach the actors how to speak dialogue that would be played backward, requiring them to learn phonetic reversals of their lines. The film's marketing campaign avoided revealing any temporal mechanics in the trailers, presenting Tenet as a conventional spy thriller to attract mainstream audiences. The first trailer showed the inverted car chase, but did not explain that the cars were moving backward through time, leaving audiences confused about what they had seen. The second trailer included brief shots of the turnstile and the oxygen masks, but Nolan insisted that the word inversion not be spoken in any promotional material. The film's poster features the protagonist walking through a shattered glass doorway, with the glass fragments arranged in a pattern that forms the Tenet logo when viewed from the correct angle. The marketing team created a website called Do You Understand Tenet? That presented viewers with a series of temporal puzzles to solve before revealing the release date. The film's social media campaign included daily posts that were identical to the previous day's posts but in reverse order, a strategy that confused followers who expected new content. The premiere was held in London with a red carpet that was half red and half blue, and attendees were asked to walk the blue half in reverse to mirror the film's inverted sequences. The film's press junket included interviews where Nolan answered questions about the plot by saying, "What's happened, happened," frustrating journalists who wanted concrete explanations. The film's novelization was released 2 months before the film itself, allowing dedicated fans to read the story before experiencing Nolan's visual interpretation. The novelization includes a prologue that explains the Zeta Square in detail, providing context that the film withholds until the final act. The film's soundtrack was released on vinyl with a locked groove that plays the same 5-note theme infinitely, creating a musical palindrome that never resolves. The home video release includes a featurette where Nolan explains the film's temporal mechanics using a whiteboard and colored markers, finally providing the exposition he refused to include in the film. This featurette has been viewed more times than the film itself on some streaming platforms, suggesting that audiences are more interested in understanding Tenet than in experiencing it emotionally. The film's merchandise includes a replica of Neil's backpack with the red trinket, which sold out within hours of being listed on the Warner Brothers store website. The most popular piece of Tenet merchandise is a t-shirt that reads "Don't try to understand it, feel it," in a font that is a palindrome, readable identically forward and backward. The film's marketing campaign cost an estimated $100 million, making it one of the most expensive original film marketing campaigns in Hollywood history. The film's relationship to the COVID-19 pandemic is complex, as Tenet was the first major studio film to release during the global lockdown period. Nolan personally lobbied Warner Brothers to release the film in theaters rather than delaying it or sending it to streaming, arguing that cinema needed a flagship release to survive. The film's release date was moved from July 17th to July 31st to August 12th to September 3rd, with each delay costing Warner Brothers millions in marketing expenses. The decision to release Tenet in theaters during a pandemic was criticized by public health officials, who argued that packed cinemas would accelerate the spread of the virus. Nolan responded to this criticism by developing a set of safety protocols for theaters showing Tenet, including mandatory masks, reduced capacity, and enhanced ventilation systems. These protocols became the industry standard for film releases during the remainder of the pandemic, though they were not always enforced by theater chains. The film's opening weekend grossed $53 million worldwide, a fraction of what a Nolan film would have earned before the pandemic, but enough to be considered a success under the circumstances. The film's performance in China was particularly strong, grossing $66 million in a market that had largely recovered from the pandemic by September 2020. The film's failure in the United States, where it grossed only $58 million, was attributed to both the pandemic and the film's perceived complexity. Many American theaters remained closed during Tenet's release window, and those that opened saw attendance rates below 30% of pre-pandemic levels. The film's streaming release on HBO Max in December 2020 was watched by an estimated 8 million households, making it one of the most streamed films of the year. Nolan's public break with Warner Bros. Over their streaming strategy was partly motivated by Tenet's performance, as the director felt the studio had abandoned theatrical exhibition too quickly. The film's financial losses, estimated at $100 million, were written off by Warner Bros. As a pandemic-related expense, though Nolan reportedly took the loss personally. The film's legacy as a pandemic-era release is that it demonstrated both the resilience of theatrical exhibition and its fragility in the face of public health crises. Some critics have argued that Tenet's cold, mechanical tone was perfectly suited to the pandemic era, when human connection was limited and audiences were hungry for intellectual stimulation. Others have argued that the film's release was irresponsible and that Nolan's insistence on theatrical exhibition endangered lives for the sake of artistic principle. The debate over Tenet's pandemic release continues to be cited in discussions of whether art should be prioritized over public health during emergencies. The film's philosophical debt to the ancient Greek concept of kairos is rarely discussed, but essential to understanding its treatment of time. Kairos is the opportune moment, the right time to act, as opposed to chronos, which is sequential measurable time. The protagonist's mission is not to change the flow of chronos, but to identify the kairos moments where action can redirect the future's course. Sato's dead man's switch is designed to exploit kairos, activating the algorithm at the precise moment when the past and future intersect. Kat's decision to kill Sato on the yacht is a kairos moment, as she must act simultaneously with the protagonist's securing of the algorithm. Neil's sacrifice at the hypocenter is the film's ultimate kairos moment, as his death occurs at the exact temporal coordinates that allow the algorithm to be secured. The film's rejection of multiverse theory is a rejection of infinite kairos, of the idea that every moment contains infinite branching possibilities. Instead, Tenet proposes that each moment contains exactly one kairos, one correct action that must be taken to preserve the timeline. The film's characters are constantly searching for kairos, trying to identify the moments where their actions will have temporal consequences. The scientist's instruction to feel it, rather than understand it, is an instruction to recognize kairos intuitively rather than analytically. The Tenet organization operates on the principle that trained operatives can sense kairos through instinct, without needing to calculate temporal mechanics. The film's final scene, where the protagonist kills Priya, is a kairos moment that he recognizes because he has been trained to feel temporal necessity. The car where the killing occurs is moving at a specific speed and direction that ensures the body will be discovered at the correct time to prevent further Tenet leaks.